Football made simple. Become great at your craft by finding ways to make it simple for those around you. This is the Coaching 101 podcast hosted by Find a Way Productions with your co-host Daniel Chamberlain and Kenny Simpson. What's up, coaches? The Coaching 101 podcast. I'm Daniel Chamberlain. That's Kenny Simpson. We're here to talk football. Coach, it's the head coach carousel season in football. Oklahoma lost Jeff Levy today, our OC. He's headed to Mississippi State, which is not really that surprising because, of course, they had Mike Leach. And so having another kind of an air raid type of guy, I think is going to fit in with what they were already planning to do personnel-wise. And, you know, they've recruited all these kids that were trying to get to the Go Fast system. And so I think that's going to fit. We were talking before we hit record about, you know, some coaches kind of on the hot seat, and there's people out there really trying to turn the temperature up on those seats, right?
Yeah, one thing I never understood as a coach, like as if you do coaching for a profession, I'm not talking about like a guy who just volunteers to coach and you're a fan, and that's fine. But like if you make your living as a coach, it bothers me to see people get on social media and ask for a different coach to get fired because they didn't do a good job. I know we look at it as, well, I'm just a high school coach and this is a college coach, or maybe I'm the college coach and it's a professional coach, whatever it is. And I think professional is a little bit different. That's in a little different boat, you know, but you get to the collegiate level and these guys are just like you. You know, I don't think we would take very kindly to people getting on there and, you know, basically saying we're incompetent and whatever it is. And so it just kind of bothers me to see that. And here's the deal. It's part of the profession. Like if you haven't figured this out, if you're coaching at the high school level in a state that cares about football, so I got to preface it with that, you know, you're in a state that they pay the coaches almost the same money they pay the principal. So if you're in one of those states, you understand when you take the job that if you don't win enough, you're going to get fired. Like you understand that walking in, or you should, or you're going to learn real quickly. You know, if you're coaching at the collegiate level, obviously it's understood. Now, obviously the professional level, of course, it's understood. To me, there's enough people that are ignorant of the sport or are just fans. They can say what they want to say because, you know, they're a fan. But it really bothers me to watch other coaches call out another coach and say that guy should get fired if it's for performance-based thing. I'm not talking about like, you know, being abusive or whatever.
Right.
I'm talking about like, you know, this guy's not winning enough. He didn't know what he's doing. He should be fired. You can think that. I'm a fan. I'm a huge Miami Dolphin fan. You know, I love them. I love watching collegiate teams play. And I've had the same amount of anger towards those probably as a lot of other people. But I just feel like it's not a good look for a coach to call out another coach. So if you're listening to this and you have some tweets, maybe you should go back and like delete those. Because one, I think it's bad karma. And two, I think it's just distasteful. I've been on the hot seat before where I've had a lot of people that put a lot of things out there that I should be fired, you know, and I've seen it with friends of mine. And that's a tough situation. It's one thing to say a guy should be fired. Well, why don't you go explain to his 10-year-old son why he has to move? Why don't you go do that? Or why don't you go explain to all the assistant coaches that sold out to this coach that they got to leave too? You know, it's not a fun time. I don't think you should be cheering the firing of coaches at any level, especially if you are a coach. So sorry, I'll get off my soapbox there, but it's coming. That time of season is coming. And guys, I'll also give you this little caveat, a little nugget. If you can improve your situation as a coach and you are worried about loyalty, improve your situation as a coach because they will fire you in a heartbeat. I'm not telling you to leave a good job. Like I'm not saying leave a good job that you're in where they treat you well. I'm telling you, if you know this is what's best for you and what's best for your family, you go do that and don't feel guilt. Because if you go 2-8, then they're going to get rid of you. And so just kind of understand that's how it works. Again, I'm not suggesting leaving like a good job where you've been for 15 years and that's different. I'm talking about, you know, this is a step up for you financially, maybe a step up for you closer to family, whatever it is. You shouldn't hesitate to take that because it's going to be, when the tables are turned, the school won't hesitate to take that either.
Yeah. As someone who's been fired, it's that's a weird place to be because especially at the high school ranks, you're calling for a college coach's job, but I mean those guys are pretty invested in where they're at. I mean, as we all are. Now, I have known coaches that just kind of rented year to year because they didn't want to be anywhere. In fact, one of them gave me advice after I got fired and said, "What you really need to do to find a job is just pick up everything you own and move to the other side of the state. That's my best recommendation to you on how to find a job." What? So I don't know, man. I'm more committed to the community. I'm more committed to this area in Oklahoma and my wife and my kids, and like we're doing bigger things than me coaching. Like I would just not coach, I guess, if I couldn't, if I was gonna have to move for a job. So people start calling for other people's jobs in coaching. It's a strange look. It's a bad look. It's bad karma, juju, whatever you want to call it.
And I'll give one more little nugget here too. If you are a guy who, let's say, you've lived somewhere for 20 years or you've lived somewhere for 15 years, I don't know who those people are, but like Daniel's kind of explaining, he's invested in his community. I would be extremely hesitant to take the head coaching job in that community. Most time, assistant coaches are going to be retained. Like they're going to, at a high school level, a lot of times you can just be a teacher and be retained. But if you flame out as a head coach, you went back to your alma mater, or you've been here for however many years, that can be really ugly and it can go down and be really, really, really painful. So I just would be kind of throw some caution there to the wind of, being a head coach is fun, but if you are more invested in the community and other things going on, maybe you just want to be an assistant in that and just enjoy in it. Because I know it's not the same everywhere. In Texas, they just fire everybody. But I think in most states, the assistants are at least given an option. They might be reassigned, but they can keep their job.
Yep.
And so just something to think about.
Yep. So if you are a coach that's riding the carousel right now, man, we feel for you and we hope that you find what you're looking for. If you're on the hot seat, hopefully you pick something up this season or next that'll help you kind of calm the waters next season and find a little bit of success. But we will get off the carousel talk now. We're going to move on. Coach, before we jump into the topic for tonight, well, we're going to talk athletes versus football players. And I know that some people go, well, yeah, athletes play football. Yeah, they do. But not all of them are athletes, right? Some of them are just very high IQ or whatever. So we're going to talk about that. Before we do, why don't you tell us how to simplify football for our players and for our staff?
Coaching 101 podcast is sponsored by Findaway Productions. Findaway Productions also sponsors fbcoachsimpson.com for all your coaching needs, with over 30 coaching materials, books, as well as 50 PowerPoints and videos and smaller materials and the free magazine headsets. Findaway Productions also sponsors offensivecoordinatoracademy.com, all things offense, and defensivecoordinatoracademy.com, all things defense.
This episode is brought to you by Athletic Speed and Movement. At athleticspeedmovement.com, we've taken Del Basquet's 45 years of speed and movement training and put it all in one place just for you. You can get the same training that NFL players have been getting for years, collegiate players have been getting for years, and now high schools across the nation are paying thousands of dollars to bring Dell in to install his system, but we've got it online for you. It's time to help your team become faster, not just in the 40, not just their sprint speed, but between the tackles and their cuts while they're chasing down the quarterback. It's time for you to help them become faster everywhere. Jump over to athleticspeedmovement.com. There's an orange button there. Just click it. It says, get the keys to playing faster. You'll get the 3 core movement video from Dell. He's explaining the science behind it, all for just the price of your email. Check it out, athleticspeedmovement.com. All right, Coach, that's awesome. Jumping right in here then. Question 1, what's the difference? What's the difference in an athlete and a football player?
Yeah, and it's kind of a tough situation because of how you define athlete. I think a lot of people, and this could be good for any sport, a lot of people define an athlete on what I call like their measurables. Like this guy's 6'4", or this guy's 210 pounds, or this guy can bench press X, or can power clean Y, or his 40 time is this, or there's these what we call these measurables that I think define like those athletic abilities, where a lot of kids get recruited based off of that. And you see a lot of NFL teams will draft guys based off of that. You see it all the time. Like, why aren't they recruiting this kid? He ran for 2,000 yards on our team. Instead, they're recruiting this guy who I think is not as good a player. And the college basically is recruiting him based off of his athletic measurables. So for the sake of the argument tonight, that's what I'm going to kind of stick with when I'm talking about athlete. Okay, so it could be different. I mean, you could call an athlete something else. Like you might say an athlete can catch a ball, can play multiple sports. For this kind of topic, we're going to say those measurables, those physical attributes are what define an athlete. Okay, and obviously, if you have those, you're much more likely to be good at football or basketball or whatever sport you put your mind to, because that is a huge part of being athletic. Being an athlete is a huge part of being athletic. However, for every coach that probably is listening to this podcast, you can think of guys that weren't good in those areas, but might have been your best player. And so you go, what was the difference? Like what made them a great football player, not necessarily a great athlete, or the opposite? What made this kid a great athlete, but not necessarily a football player? So those are I call those the intangibles, things you can't see, you can't like measure them, and they can range from a whole lot of different things. So they could be mental toughness. You may have a kid that's just incredibly mentally tough. Nothing phases them. They're calm under pressure. You may have an athlete who's the opposite, a great athlete who's never really gone through a trial. And so that's an obvious one. A lot of people can identify that one right off the bat. But there are other ones. I think intelligence. I think you see teams in Arkansas all the time where there are a bunch of these kids that they might have a couple D2 players and they're waxing these teams with all these D1 guys that are going to go play at the highest level. How in the world is this team beating them? Well, they got a bunch of extremely high IQ players. And high IQ doesn't mean like I have English. That doesn't matter in football. I'm talking about a football IQ. You could have a kid who's maybe he's not really the most educated as far as the traditional sense, but he's extremely quick at picking up what's going on and has a great football IQ. That kid who maybe he grew up watching the game. That's why a lot of coaches' sons tend to do well, because they've been around the game. It could be somebody who just has a natural instinct for it. I've had kids before that it was natural. They kind of naturally found the ball. So they have these natural instincts that you've got. Or you could have a high IQ. Or it could be somebody who's incredibly dedicated to the sport. I think that is sometimes not looked at enough by coaches. We just assume all the kids love football the same, and that's not the case. We have kids on our roster who I think if we said, you got to run through this wall to make a tackle, they wouldn't blink. My son's probably too smart. He'd be like, nah, I'm good. I'm not going to do that. But sometimes those kids are just something about them where they just play the game with reckless abandon. And you see it at birth. Like that's something you see at birth with your own children. Like guys that when they go in to make contact, the natural inclination for 99% of Americans is to flinch a little bit. And then there's that 1% of weirdos that just right through it. My firstborn son was that way since he was a baby, headbutting his mom when he was 6 months old, running through people in flag football. And so that's just one of those deals he was born with. So that's another trait that's an intangible trait that, he might not run a 4.40, but this kid is going to have all these other traits that make him a good football player. And so those are intangibles. Then there are other random skills that might translate. We call these guys like farm strong, like these guys that they can't bench press 200 pounds, but for some reason, their core of their body, they're usually good wrestler type kids that they can't get blocked. And so there's like this unique skill set. Or it could be a receiver with great hands or a great ability to understand how to get open. So there's these random skill sets that fit the sport of football that a guy might have that can't really measure that. Like a Wes Welker guy at receiver where he just finds ways to get open. He was a good athlete, but he wasn't as good as a lot of other athletes. Right. But he was always open. Jerry Rice is another one, always open. So there's a skill set this kid had. The last one I'll put on there is toughness. I kind of talked about it a little bit ago, but there's a toughness. There's a toughness to play football, and it's not just physical. There's a physical toughness to play football, the ability to play through pain. Some kids, I think it was Bill Parcells that said the greatest ability is availability. Some kids are able to constantly play, and they're never hurt. Some kids are always hurt. Some
Right.
kids don't know if they're hurt or they're not hurt. So there's a physical, toughness that you have to play the sport. But there's also, we mentioned in the first part of the question, a mental toughness. And I think that's the hardest part of the sport. You play when it's 100 degrees and you can barely see straight. And then if you're good, you play when it's 30 degrees and it could be sleeting on you. And so, which kids handle that stuff? Which kids handle when we're getting killed and we got to make a play and the whole crowd's against you? Which kids handle getting yelled at by a coach? Which kids handle getting yelled at by an opposing player? Which kids can handle that kind of stuff? And so, toughness is physical as well as mental toughness. And I think those are the things you look at that you can't measure any of that stuff. Now, obviously, and I'm gonna let you go here in a minute, Daniel. You like to have both. The ones that have both are usually playing at a very high level, and so you need to have both on your team. You can have all the mental toughness and physical toughness in the world. If you run a 5-2, I'm probably still going to start the guy who runs a 4-4 at receiver. We need to find another spot for you. So I think that's another question we're going to ask as we kind of go through this.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can have all the physical or mental toughness in the world you want. And sometimes that athletic ability is just not quite where it needs to be to play at whatever level or position that you want to play.
Yeah, I don't really have a lot to add here on this one, just because you kind of you hammered it. Just the differences, when I think difference, I always end up thinking DBs and wide receivers, and like which wide receiver is my go getter. Just I'm going to outrun everybody to the ball, and then which one, like you said, the Wes Welker type, who's going to put a technical route on you, who's going to find the open space, maybe break it at the wrong distance, but have built that with a quarterback, and they're going to find a way to be open without necessarily just outrunning the defense. Just go where they aren't, kind of a situation. So
Well, you see it. You think about it all the times you see this because you've coached now long enough. The college recruiter comes in, and the first thing they ask for the quarterback, man, he's got a great arm. If you're playing NFL level, that probably is a huge trait you got to have. But at the high school level, I think that's probably ninth on a list of 10 things I'm looking for. Who's going to be our quarterback? Even if we're going to throw the ball, is how strong is his arm? There's so many more things that go into it.
Yeah. And just, I always think about kids that understand space. So if I've got a safety or a corner, if I've got an athlete out there, we're in cover one, he's just manning up, taking away the slant. Let's go. It's a foot race. I want it to be a track meet. If I have a high IQ football player, he's looking at spacing. Where do I think that route's about to try to go? What combo do these two guys like to run against, with each other? So it's just that next level thinking, because he has to, because he's got to go where you're about to go. He's not going to beat you there unless he has that advantage. So we'll jump right into the second question here, and that's, how do you plan to use each of these in your system?
Yeah, and that's the hard part of this question, because everybody that's listening to this has both of these kids in your program. Even if you're coaching the NFL level, you got both these guys on your roster, because you have to. Everybody would like the ultimate kid, which is a great athlete, and he has all the other traits. Everybody wants that kid. If you have that kid, you're probably going to have a ring on your finger because you're going to win a state championship if you got a bunch of those kids.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about reality, where you probably have some of each. Okay, I live in a place where I have a whole lot of this type 2, like a type 2. We don't have a lot of the type 1s. We got a bunch of the type 2s, but we have a few type 1s that for our level, for our school, I would like them to be maybe a little different in the intangible things, but for our school, they're too good not to play. Does that make sense? And you have that kid at yours. It's kind of a graduate scale, graduating scale wherever you live. Your athlete versus my athlete may look different depending on what part of the country you live in, what level you're coaching. But all of us have those 4 or 5 kids that we wish were a little bit better in the intangibles. And that might be just IQ, football IQ. They just have never played. It could be that simple. That could be, I wish they were a little mentally tougher. I wish they were a little more physically tough. I wish they were a little more football savvy. I wish they would fill in the blank of all those intangibles that we put on there. They're short some of those, but they're usually a great athlete. So you got to figure out, how do I use this kid? Because you can't just sit that kid on your bench. Like, that kid's too good. Generally, those kids need to be around the ball in some way. They either need to be around the ball as far as on offense, you're giving them the ball or throwing them the ball, like a receiver or running back. Obviously, we'd like them to be mentally tough, play running back, but You can have a guy who's new to football and doesn't know much, but he understands don't get tackled. Like, he
Right.
understands that. Or he could be the guy that is new to football. He understands, like, get open. So there are roles on the offensive side of the ball. Generally, they're the guy that touches the ball because that's the easiest spot to learn. Less technique on how to block and how to do all this kind of stuff, how to pick up a blitz. So there's a lot of things that it's not that they don't want to do. There's maybe something that's not their thing. Or on the other side of the ball, they're usually going to be put in a position for us where they're going to tackle the ball. Okay. We usually want to have at least one high IQ kid on all levels of our defense. One of those guys that fits that mold of maybe he's not the best athlete, but he has all of those other skills at every level. Okay. And then that allows you to play athletes next to them where that kid can kind of rub off on those kids. Again, I don't want you to think like you can be an athlete and you don't have any skills. Generally, a lot of times this comes with just a guy who's raw, just a raw athlete. He might be really mentally tough, but he's never played football before. So the first time he gets lit up, he didn't really know how to react to that. So having guys back there with him that can help him. And then the flip side of that is we try to use our other kids, those high intangible type kids, in leadership type roles. Generally, we want to have one, like I mentioned, at every level on our team. Almost always they're on the offensive line, and because that's just tends to be a place you can put a lot of kids at the high school level and be really good. Usually the other side of those play defensive line for us, like those great athletes that maybe are raw, generally play defensive line, and our more technical, skilled, savvy, whatever kids usually play offensive line. That's just kind of something we've done. Okay. You also want to use those kids and pair them up together, like let them work with the other kids so they can teach them. And then you need to work. I think this is going to be the next question you got to hear, Daniel, but we're also going to work with developing their weakness. So I want to point this out here, and then we'll talk about it later on in the next question.
Of course.
Like you need to work on the weakness of each. So if you have a high IQ kid, you need to spend a lot of time. How can I make him faster? Like that's the biggest thing in football. I know we think of strength, and strength does matter, but the more I've been around it, the more I think speed matters more. So how can we develop his speed? And then strength, of course. And then the other side, those athletes, you're going to do the opposite. So you're going to work on their weakness, but here's the part that's different. You're going to coach to their strengths. And I think a lot of coaches miss that. They say, this kid can't play for me. Well, then be a better coach. We had a kid at quarterback this year who really wasn't a normal quarterback. I couldn't run all the plays I wanted to run, all those cool things I put out in books and stuff that I drew up. And I got this whole thing where, well, all right, well, here chapters 3 through 4, we can't run this year. So I'm going to put this other kid at quarterback who's not as good for our team. No, we're going to coach to his strength. And we're going to come up with things that highlight what he does. We're going to work on the other stuff. We're going to work on his weaknesses and make him better. But I'm not going to ask him to do that with our season on the line. Instead, I'm going to have adapted my system to fit what he does well. My son this year's a sophomore for us. He had to call the whole DB group because all 4 were brand new. They had a freshman, a sophomore, junior, and a senior. But the senior hadn't played football in 3 years. So basically, the coach's kid had to call everything, which made him play free safety, which is not, if you're a football guy, listen to this. My son is not a free safety. He's playing outside linebacker / strong safety. That's probably where his skill suited. He get 120 tackles. That's where you got to play. But in our system, we got to have a free safety that can call the coverages, can play to the field, can play to their sideline. So he had to play out of position, And so a lot of times you've got to take those kids and put them maybe out of position. And we would prefer the 4.5 40 kid to play free safety and him who's a 4.7 40 to play strong safety. But with what we needed in our system, we needed him to play there. So we would tweak our game plan to figure out ways to get him down near the box and get our strong safety out in the coverage game. And so it's things you've got to do within your system so that you can be effective, especially it's magnified at every level of football at the quarterback position, where we have this set idea of what we want at quarterback. And we, as coaches, do a horrible job of adjusting to what we have. I've now coached, we run the gun T system. So if you are listening to this and you're interested in getting it, we have the gun T system, which I think what's valuable about it is I think it's adaptable. And the reason it's adaptable is not because I made it that way, it's because I had to make it that way. Like I've got a prototype quarterback I want. I don't get to go recruit him. So I get
Right.
what walks through the hallway. So every year we have to adjust what we do to fit what he does. And I think a lot of times at the highest levels, especially college, NFL, 6A level football, coaches kind of have this is our system. And when we have our guys, we're good. And we don't have our guys, we suck. And that's not an acceptable answer for me. So to me, you need to adjust to your guys.
Yeah, I like what you said about having one of those high IQ or I used to call it hiding a player, right? Like the kid who's just not an athlete, who can't and sometimes I think that's probably one that isn't even a football player. You're generally hiding just like a body. May as well be an empty uniform. And so you hope it's not that's not the case. They can go out and do something for you. I understand that. I mean, there's teams out there that maybe they should be playing 8-man, but they're stuck at the 11-man level and they just don't have the guys, right?
I
So
would
yours
say
is a little bit different.
hide those on your sideline if you have those. Sorry.
Yes, no, that's fine. Um, I tend to like the anywhere where we can just play one on one. I mean, that can be an athlete. So we talked about the corner earlier. We talked about our X receivers. Just the guy I need you to go deep, jump up and catch a jump ball. I don't need it to be a guy who's learning a lot of shifts and motions and what to do here. You talked about your son being the free safety, right? I mean, that's spot on. Like I want a high IQ kid there, someone that understands the game. If he's an athlete, great. If not, that's okay. Because I've taught him some tendencies. I've taught him spacing and all the stuff we were talking about earlier, and have given him a little bit of a cheat code because he can remember it, right? It's not going to blow his mind. Just taking those little things and remembering them. So,
And then the guy, more on that story, the guy next to him hadn't played football in 3 years, but he was the same size as my boy, but he ran a 4.5. He had 120 tackles this year also, just hadn't played football. So he actually, I thought a lot of games outperformed Braden, but a lot of times Braden was getting him lined up and kind of helping him through it. So that's a good example of good athlete. And he was a great kid. So when I say like, his only issue was he had no experience. That was his
right.
issue, and then you got the one back there who's grown up around it. So those two next to each other could really help each other a lot. And I think that's more coaches should do things like that.
If you find yourself like with a minimal number of athletes, I think that's where you just make sure your system incorporates, like, are you going to be a field and boundary type of team? A lot of, I grew up in the strong and weak, like I had a strong side and a weak side. I've kind of picked up the field and boundary stuff this year, and I think that's excellent. Because you can take that kid who can absolutely run and put him to the field and let him stick on a guy, right? And then the kid who's like, I see where you're lined up. I know you're just trying to take me deep in the boundary. I'm just going to back up a little bit and be able to come up and make a tackle. So I think defensively a lot, offensively just as much. You talked earlier about the running back needs to be able to read stuff, right? Needs to understand. I can look out here and see where the force player is. Are we going to get to that block? What happens if not? And then I was kind of mentored to put the best athlete at quarterback. If you have the dude, Kenny, you talked about maybe your quarterback doesn't have to have a strong arm.
Right.
If you just got a dude that can go, your system needs to be able to incorporate that too, right? Like you need to be able to put. Listen, if you've got Michael Vick without the arm, put him a quarterback. Why would you even risk him having to fumble a handoff? Just let him snap it to him, let him go. Yep. You can teach up some kind of little RPO and let him throw something, little slants or little pop passes or whatever, just enough to slow down and the defense and
I think there's certain intangibles I think you look for a quarterback. Like I think there's certain things they kind of have to have. Like in my goal, they got to be one of the harder workers. They got to be a good, they got to be a good leader. They don't have to be, and leadership can look different. I think sometimes, I know this podcast, I'll try to be phrases politically correct, I guess, but certain times, especially older coaches, have like a prototype quarterback that they think you ought to kind of look like and act like and have a 4.0. I'll be honest, like sometimes the leaders in your program, they're not that guy. Like they look different, they act different. They may not be a 4.0 kid, but
Right.
when it comes time to get the team pointed the right direction, they have that ability, and you can usually figure out who those guys are. My best years, so at Southside, we went 10-2 this year. We went 10-2 a couple years when we had a kid in that boat too. We had a couple deep runs were the years when we had the alpha playing quarterback. Like, you can put a good athlete back there, you can put a good kid back there. Our best years, our best 4 years at Southside, where not only was he a pretty good athlete, he was the alpha. Like, he was the dude. And so I think that's kind of something I always have looked for. And then we'll look for what's his skill set. And this year we ran for 4,200 yards, and a couple of years ago we had a kid where we threw the ball for 2,800 yards, but they were the dude.
Yeah. When we started off and you were talking about, what is an athlete, you said, I just think something you can see, you always see the NFL combine and they're like measuring the hand of a quarterback. And I'm like, I mean, I get it. Look, I have these little hands. Okay. I got like the little Trump hands or whatever. Mama didn't grace me with big hands, but what, Kyler Murray's hands can't be that big because that dude's shorter than me, probably like a couple inches, I think. And he can flat get it. So I don't care. I'm not sure hand size has ever been. I mean, at some point, isn't it like a detriment? You watch.
You also see like all these arguments about, like, is Tua better than Josh Allen? Is Josh Allen better than Tua? I don't know. I mean, like, it's both of them are so different.
Right.
Like, they're used so differently. Or, is Jalen Hurts better than Tua? Well, Nick Saban didn't think so. But if you're a Philadelphia Eagle fan, you might, because
right
of how
you
they're
might be
using
thinking
him.
so.
So I think a lot of times quarterbacks, especially quarterbacks, we're scared to take the athlete because we're scared to adjust to what they can do.
Yeah.
Because that means we have to change what we do instead of making a kid conform to us.
Yep. Last question here. How do we help develop the other side? And this is a question that I have I'm going to be jotting down notes. Of course I do for the podcast anyway, but because and I'll actually start here. I tell you, when we took over a different school, me and another coach, I don't want the school out there because, kids, I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, but there were kids that just didn't know football. They were our best athletes. We didn't have a lot of kids anyway, but those guys just didn't know football. And so all I knew to do was like, I'll just start from the beginning. Like, I'll just develop a course. In the military, I'm an instructor, and so I have the ability to create courses out of just common knowledge. So that's what I did. I just made football a course, and we just did it every day at lunch. And I just called it, like, I think they were trying to both be quarterbacks. I called it like Quarterback Academy or something. But literally starting with the dimensions of a football field. Where do the hashes go? Where are the numbers? Because all of that in my head makes sense for spacing, and I'm just trying to pass on as much as possible. What are the gaps called, and what are the defensive line tech? All those things, like, because they just didn't know any football. And so I'm just trying to group together all the football IQ so that way they can have a conversation in the same lingo that we speak as coaches. I don't know if that's the best way. That was just the only way I knew. So I'm really interested to see kind of where you've done that, to kind of coach up the other side of the ball when you have an athlete. And I think weight room and is going to end up being
Right.
train speed and train strength is going to be how you make an athlete. But
Right.
anyway, so I'll pass that question on to you.
Yeah, we'll start kind of with yours. So I think the one most people are going to want to know about is, how do I train up an athlete? Because you see these kids and you can tell, and this is the guy, we need him to be a guy for us. So again, it depends on what trait they're missing. Are they missing toughness? How do you really train toughness? So I think there's sometimes you can train it in a not good way. Like, I think confidence breeds toughness. Like, that's what I think. I'm not a military guy. These kids did not sign up to go fight in a war overseas. So I don't think those tactics should be used with high school kids. That's just my 2 cents.
Right.
I'm not saying that there's no reason to have discipline. And there's a lot of great things the military can do for a lot of people. However, I don't really want to run my program that way because that's not what these kids signed up to do. Right. So I think confidence a lot of times can breed toughness. And you can get confidence in your kids lots of ways. Weight room is one of them. Like, your kid, everybody should get stronger naturally. You're going to be a little tougher because you're going to be a little more confident what you can do. I think sometimes you can speak it into existence. Like, we're going to be a tough team. We're going to be this. We're going to be this. And the more you say it and the more you point out the positives when that happens, the more likely you are to start getting buy-in from kids that, okay, we are going to be tough. Like, that's what we're going to be. We're going to hustle. And then we're going to figure out a time. We're going to point out all these things on film. We're going to point out all these things during the off season that show our hustle. And look at how good we're doing. And look at how great we're doing. I think sometimes you can speak it into existence. So that's one way you can do toughness. I think if it's something like the other ones that most people think about, like football knowledge, I think an academy is great. Why not do it in an academy? Sit them all down in the off season and talk about all this stuff. The other thing I think that we do a good job of, and I think more coaches are starting to go to, is we never snap a ball at practice in team without a situation being present. So if we're on offense, it's constant. Hey guys, this is a tempo period. What do you think we're trying to accomplish? Trying to go fast. Why would we be trying to go fast? And we kind of go through those rules. Hey guys, this is going to be a hash work period. So we're going to work left hash, right hash. We're going to explain kind of what we're doing on all that. Why would we condense our splits? Why would we be tighter? Why would we run this play to the field? Why would we run it to the boundary? And so we're going to work on red zone. What's red zone mean? We're going to work on, all right, these are all we have to score plays from the 1, 2, 4, 7, and 8. These are all 4th and goals, and explaining how we are okay to turn the ball over in those situations because we got to try to score no matter what.
Right.
Okay? And we're going to work on 2-minute drill, and then we're going to work on third downs, and then so you have to do this stuff in practice so these kids get it. So we spend for defense, it's a little different. For defense, usually Mondays, formational recognition. Tuesdays, a lot of their base plays. So we'll work hashes a lot on Tuesdays. And then Wednesdays is all situational. It's all their third down plays and all their red zone plays that we come at our defense with. On offense, we work third down and red zone every single day because those are the plays that are going to win and lose the game for you. And your kid understanding that 3rd and 11, I got to take my route 12 yards. Or I can't run the ball at quarterback if it's 4th and 7 and I can't get at least 7 yards. And so I think that's something that you have to do as a coach is practice that stuff. And the easiest times to do it is during team. It should make you a better play caller because it's now making you call plays that aren't just plays. They're plays you would literally call in that situation. And a lot of times we'll call on Tuesday, oh, don't call that Friday. That was horrible. And so it kind of helps you and it helps the kids learn that stuff. And we get into red zone. We talk to our DBs about now we're going to defend the front and let them get behind us instead of playing deep. And we talk about hey guys, what is a pass interference down here? Half the distance. Is it a first down? No, sir. So we never want to let a guy catch the ball in the end zone if we could interfere them. Because if we interfere them, they don't call it, we win. And if they do call it, it's still 4th and goal. And so those type of conversations can happen if you're practicing that. Doing it in a classroom is good, and I think you should, but doing it right there with them and immediately coaching them instantly, I think is a little more effective with those kids who maybe have issues on the knowledge part of it. Okay. And then I think you got to put them in positions to succeed. Like I think you got to take a good athlete and put him in a position where he's gifted. He might not be the toughest kid. So maybe throw him screens out in the field, maybe throw him out routes, maybe throw him things that he can be confident with, instead of and trying to, bang a square peg in a round hole by running up the middle or build your offense around a kid who's not really super tough, a guy who's not shown the ability to stay healthy. You might not want to build your offense around that kid because it's just not going to go well for you.
Right.
So that's how I'd handle the first group. Second group, like you mentioned, is almost an easy answer there. I would focus a ton on speed with those kids. I think generally those kids don't struggle due to strength. When you're going to lift weights. I'm a big believer in lifting weights and getting stronger because I think they do correlate. Squat more, run faster, that kind of stuff. But I think a lot of times with those kids will actually sometimes work too hard. Like they'll come in a weight room and work too hard, or you got to put on 20 pounds. Well, they're going to probably really do that, but it might not be the 20 pounds you wanted them to put on. So, it needs to be a little careful of those guys of, hey, here's what we need you to get. Here's some things we can do to help you get there. And I think those are the kids that you want leading the other kids. So that would be my suggestions.
Yes. Invest in a good weight room program, invest in a good speed program. Those are, when you're you have the IQ kid and you just need him to be better on the field. If you don't already know what you're doing, go hire a professional. I wish there was a professional I could hire that just raised all my football players' IQs and maybe the coaches too. But that's just something you're gonna have to go out and do a lot of self study and teach kids football. I mean, almost like you are teaching a new coach, right? Just teach them what football is and how it operates and the why. A lot of the why. That's something I don't remember getting a ton of back when I was a kid, but I was in a whirlwind. I'll just tell you that from the time that I put on a helmet to the time that I took it off the last time, I was in a whirlwind of I don't know what's going on.
I
Whatever
think
reason, I was a different type of intellect. So
a lot of times as coaches, we kind of want to rush through practice so that we can say we had an efficient practice, or we can say we had got a lot of reps.
right.
We do special teams sometimes. We don't even like do anything live, but we go through all the rules. Like we don't ever fall on a blocked punt, and kind of go through that so they understand.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff out there you can teach. We had my first coach, Dylan Terry up in Wyandotte. We had a rule of the week, and so that was you just pulled up the football rules and you found one that didn't make sense. The the big one, it seemed like if a kick goes out of bounds and it's a touchback and you get it from the 20, or if you fair catch a ball, you can try to kick
Right.
um
Free kick.
yeah, you get a free kick, right? So it's like all these things that kids don't know, and a lot of coaches don't either because we kind of get just the basics, and then we have to kind of jump out there into the fire. So, all right, Coach. Well, we will push on past this. We'll get to our last part here and what not to do as a coach. So, why don't you tell us what our lesson is today?
And this is one I had to learn myself. Our lesson on what not to do as a coach today is don't cry about what you don't have, coach what you do have. And that was a hard lesson for me. I learned it when I was 0-10 because I was coaching my rear end off. I worked harder that year than I think I did this year. And this year we went 10-2 because I was everything. And it just felt like everything we did didn't go well. And so the natural instinct for me was to start blaming whatever. Don't have the athletes. I wish I had that guy. I wish I had that guy. I wish we didn't have this guy. I wish this kid was a senior. I wish this kid had done whatever. And I think one of my administrators, actually, he's a good friend of mine now, and he didn't fire me. So he was doing this out of kindness, was, coach, at some point, you got to take ownership for what you can do. And I thought that was a very good life lesson, not a fun life lesson, but a good life lesson to kind of go through. And I think you've talked about in that book, Extreme Ownership,
Yeah.
where at some point as a coach, you can only control what you can control. And it's a lot easier for me to say that than it is to actually live that. But when your kids watch you do that and your coaches watch you do that, then they're going to make excuses. And now you've built a culture on blame this, blame that, blame anybody but me. And I think when the kids recognize you don't do that, that you do take the blame for what you could have done and how you could have helped make them better, a lot of times they'll stop you. Coach, I know what you're saying, but that was our fault. And that now you've got a good culture. When the kids hear you take the blame, because guys, we just didn't work that enough. That's my fault. And they step in and go, no, we did. We just made a mistake on that. And then we all look at each other and go, okay, you did, and now let's move on.
Yep.
And so now you've kind of created the culture you wanted to create. But as a coach, it starts with the personnel. I wish I had more athletes. I wish I had more high IQ kids. I wish I had this kid. I wish I had more, middle income kids. I wish I had more wealthy kids. I wish I had more kids with a dog in them. Whatever you wish you had, every coach has it. Every coach has a list of what they wish you had. Don't worry about that. Instead, figure out what demographics you have and how you can make that group better.
Yep, that is a very slippery slope to start down, is the blame game, because I've coached kids who legitimately wouldn't play their hardest, because if they played their hardest and failed, they were a failure. But as long as they could say, well, we didn't try as hard as we could have, and here's our excuses why we didn't do that, then it's okay. Then they get sympathy, and so you do build a very bad foundation if that's what you start on. So I appreciate that. All right, man. Well, we will get out of here. Any new books? I know that 5.0 is out, right?
Yeah, 5.0, we've sold out of the first batch. So we got another batch coming in. If you want gun teeth, 5.0 is out. Of course, that means there's 4 other books. So don't start with that one. A lot of people asking me that. When you want to start with the original playbook, basically every year we've just added the new stuff we've put into the offense.
Yeah.
So the 5.0 has that. I think all our workbooks are going crazy too. Our offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, and head coaching workbooks, because now's the time of the year everybody's putting together their defense, putting together offense for next year. Or if you're a head coach, you might be interviewing for a job. So those workbooks are really good for off-season materials. And all those can be found over at fbcoachsimpson.com.
Awesome. Sweet. Well, we'll jump out of here. We'll cover social media first. I'm on Twitter at Coach Chambo OK. You can also email me at chamberlainfootballconsulting@gmail.com. If you're on here on Facebook, that's where I'm at. That's Daniel Bryce Chamberlain. I'm trying to get a little page going for Chamberlain Football Consulting. It's probably a week or two in the works, just to share things like this podcast and the other one and all the things these guys are selling because they're so stinking useful. Coach, where can we find you on social media?
All things FB Coach Simpson. So FB Coach Simpson is my Twitter handle. FBCoachSimpson@gmail.com is my email address. You can also find me in all of those Facebook groups as well. And then, of course, the website is fbcoachsimpson.com.
Awesome. All right. I want to thank you for being a listener to the Coaching 101 podcast. We hope you'll join us next week as we continue to make the complex more simple. Please consider subscribing to the show so you always know when the new episodes are out. We'll leave you with this. It's hard to beat someone who never gives up. No matter the situation, find a way.